Closure is treated like an event. A conversation, an explanation, an apology, a final message. Something happens, and the mind is supposed to quiet. The loop is supposed to stop. But notice how rarely that happens. You get the explanation. You hear the reasoning. You even understand it intellectually. And the loop continues. You replay the tone, the wording, the timing, the silence between sentences. You imagine alternate versions, better responses, stronger exits, sharper clarity. Closure was supposed to quiet this. It didn't, because the loop was never purely informational. When something feels unfinished, we assume we are missing data. If we knew why, if we understood the full story, if the other person explained themselves clearly, then the internal noise would stop. But internal noise is rarely caused by missing information. It is caused by unresolved activation. Your system was disturbed. Something felt destabilizing. Something disrupted your sense of safety, identity, or belonging. The mind interprets that disturbance as a problem to solve. So it loops. It scans for explanation. It searches for meaning. It reconstructs the timeline. But explanation is cognitive. Disturbance is physiological. You can understand something and still feel unsettled. You can accept someone's reasoning and still replay the moment. Because closure is expected to do something it was never designed to do. It is expected to regulate the nervous system, to calm the body, to neutralize threat, to restore coherence. But words rarely settle activation. When something disrupts attachment, status, identity, or perceived control, the system reacts. And reaction does not dissolve just because information arrives. This is why you can receive the apology and still feel restless. Why you can get the answer and still think about it at night. The expectation was external resolution, but the disturbance was internal. And internal loops are not quieted by events. They are quieted by regulation, by the nervous system returning to baseline, by the body no longer scanning for threat, by identity stabilizing again. Closure is often imagined as something another person gives you, but the loop continues until your system feels safe, not until the story makes sense. This is the myth, that explanation equals peace, that clarity equals quiet. But peace is regulatory, and quiet is physiological. Closure is rarely internal because we keep searching for it outside, and the loop keeps running because it was never asking for answers. It was asking for stability. When something feels unresolved, the mind does not simply remember it. It reopens it. Not once, not occasionally. It replays it. The conversation, the look, the delay in response, the silence that followed. Each detail is reviewed as if something critical was missed. This repetition is not obsession in the way people assume. It is an attempt at certainty. Ambiguity destabilizes the system. When the outcome is unclear, when motives are uncertain, when intention is unknown, the mind cannot categorize the experience. And categorization is stabilizing. It tells you where you stand. It tells you who you are in the situation. It tells you what to expect next. Without that structure, the nervous system keeps scanning. You replay the moment not because you enjoy suffering, but because uncertainty feels unsafe. If someone leaves without explanation, your system does not just lose a person. It loses orientation. Were you rejected? Misunderstood? Too much? Not enough? The questions multiply, because the story is incomplete. and incomplete stories feel threatening, not symbolically, physiologically. Ambiguity activates vigilance. Your body tightens, your attention narrows, your mind keeps returning. Certainty would allow relaxation. Even painful certainty is easier than open-ended ambiguity. Knowing you were rejected can be more stabilizing than not knowing why someone left. Because certainty restores structure. The loop is an attempt to build that structure internally when it was not provided externally. You analyze tone, you dissect wording, you reconstruct timelines. You try to land on a definitive explanation. If I had done this differently, if they meant this instead, if the outcome proves that, the mind keeps negotiating with possibility. But the loop rarely ends with a clean answer, because the original disturbance was not purely cognitive. It was relational. Relational ambiguity touches identity. Where do I stand? How am I seen? What does this say about me? These are not surface questions. They are structural. If your identity feels destabilized, certainty becomes urgent. The loop intensifies until something solid forms. Sometimes that solid form is self-blame. Sometimes it is resentment. Sometimes it is a narrative about the other person. The specific story matters less than the stability it provides. The loop quiets not when the story is accurate, but when it feels coherent. Coherence allows the nervous system to settle. This is why external answers often fail to end internal loops, because even with explanation, the system may still feel ambiguous. Information can clarify facts. It cannot automatically restore certainty about identity, safety, or belonging. And until certainty returns, the loop continues. Not as punishment, as protection. The mind is not trying to torment you, it is trying to eliminate ambiguity. Because ambiguity keeps the system on alert, and alert systems do not rest. If this perspective resonates, like the video. Subscribe if you want more. No pressure, just awareness. You assume that once you know the truth, the loop will stop. If they explain themselves clearly, if the full story is revealed, if the missing piece is finally provided, then the replay will quiet. But information does not equal regulation. You can receive the explanation, you can understand it logically, you can even agree with it, and still feel unsettled, because the disturbance was never purely intellectual. When something disrupted you, it did not only affect your thinking, it affected your body, your sense of orientation, your internal stability. It activated something. Activation is not resolved by narrative alone. You can know why something happened and still feel the contraction. The mind confuses explanation with repair. But explanation is descriptive. Repair is regulatory. When someone gives you an answer, they are offering structure, a reason, a storyline, a sequence that makes sense. But structure does not automatically settle threat. If your attachment felt destabilized, a clear explanation does not immediately restore safety. If your identity felt challenged, a logical answer does not instantly rebuild coherence. The nervous system does not calm because the story is tidy. It calms when it no longer perceives instability, when it no longer anticipates danger, when it no longer scans for rupture. This is why apologies sometimes fail. The words may be sufficient, but the system may still feel unsafe. You may get closure in language, but not in physiology. You may have resolution in fact, but not in sensation. And sensation drives repetition. Internal noise continues because the body has not returned to baseline, because vigilance has not been switched off, because something inside still feels incomplete. External answers operate in cognition. Internal loops operate in activation. Activation does not dissolve through reasoning alone. You can intellectually move on while your nervous system remains unsettled. You can accept the explanation while still replaying the tone, because the replay is not searching for facts anymore. It is searching for safety. It is searching for coherence. When the body feels incomplete, the mind keeps narrating. It keeps analyzing. It keeps reconstructing. Not to understand, but to stabilize. This is the quiet miscalculation. You keep seeking more explanation for what is essentially dysregulation. And no amount of explanation can directly regulate your system. The expectation that something external will quiet something internal is misplaced. Because quiet is not granted. It is restored. And restoration does not come from knowing more. It comes from settling. Until that settling happens, the loop will continue. Not because you lack closure, but because your system has not yet stabilized. Closure is often imagined as a conclusion, a final conversation, a definitive answer, a moment that seals the narrative. Something happens, and the mind is expected to go quiet. But quiet does not come from conclusions. It comes from regulation, from the nervous system returning to baseline, from vigilance decreasing, from the body no longer scanning for rupture. Resolution is cognitive. Regulation is physiological. You can resolve a story and still feel unsettled, because the story was never the only disturbance. When attachment feels disrupted, when identity feels questioned, when stability feels shaken, the system activates, and activation seeks safety. We mistake resolution for safety because it provides structure. Structure feels calming. But structure without regulation is fragile. You can tell yourself it's over. You can say you understand. And still feel tension in your chest when the memory surfaces, because the body has not reorganized. The system has not recalibrated. Internal quiet is not created by someone else's clarity. It is created by your system no longer perceiving threat. That shift is subtle. It is not dramatic. It is not announced. It is felt as spaciousness, as reduced urgency, as fewer mental returns to the scene. This is why chasing closure externally often prolongs the loop. Each new piece of information reactivates the system. You think you are finishing it, but you are re-entering it. Regulation does not require perfect answers. It requires internal settling. That settling may come through distance, through new experiences, through stability in other relationships. It rarely comes through explanation alone, because explanation organizes thought. Regulation reorganizes state. When your state changes, the loop loses urgency. Not because you solved it, but because it no longer feels threatening. Closure is rarely internal because we expect it to be delivered. But internal quiet is not delivered. It is restored through stability. When the system stabilizes, the narrative softens. The memory loses intensity. The replay decreases. And you notice something unexpected. You no longer need an answer. Not because you forgot, but because you are no longer activated. If this perspective helped you observe something more clearly, consider liking the video and subscribing, not for resolution, but for continued awareness.